you know, yo, yo, kalo, yo, qua, qua, hello, no, you know, yo, 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 qua, qua, hello, no, you know, yo. Hojka, CM, Hojka from Huyamise. Look, oh, yo, oh, no, yo, yo, kalo, yo. Oh, that's awesome. Hello, everybody. Huyamise Della Rice-Sylvester.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Moss, for that absolutely lovely opening. I want to thank you so much for that, for welcoming us. And we'd like to welcome all of you who are joining us here tonight. So you can see it's going to be a really special and really wonderful evening. So essentially, yeah, we have these two lovely artists, this beautiful mother-daughter team who are going to share from their own experiences and from their beautiful matching and then different perspectives we're going to hear from. The chat is open, so if you do have questions, we'll have a Q&A at the end that we can refer to, so please feel free to enter your questions at any time. And of course, we also want to acknowledge, you know, we're all in different places from our different homes joining. And this is made possible through the University of Washington, and the university sits on Coast Salish lands, on traditional Indigenous lands. So we want to honor that, really say thank you for that, for the Coast Salish peoples, and to recognize the many different peoples wherever we are joining in from our homes. So I do have actual written bios for both of these amazing people. So I guess I'll start with Emma. So Emma Elliott-Groves. Oh, here, let me spotlight so you can actually see Emma. Emma is Cowichan. She's also a UW assistant professor in the Department of Learning Sciences and Human Development. She holds a PhD in educational psychology and a Master of Social Work with children, youth, and families. She's also an affiliate faculty with the College of Education's Banks Center for Educational Justice. So much of Emma's journey centers on understanding the meanings and explanations of suicidal behavior from the perspectives of Indigenous peoples. Her stories grow from ethical frameworks generated by Indigenous and land-based knowledges and practices to create process-centered approaches that illuminate Indigenous pathways toward collective livelihood. And by employing a strengths-based approach, she rigorously engages with youth, families, and communities in the development of integrated social and behavioral research and practice to address all these complex social issues. So Emma has partnered with her home community to design opportunities to strengthen the physical, mental, intellectual, and cultural health by engaging Indigenous and place-based knowledges. So let's see. Using land as a pedagogy, her project engages both her Cowichan elders, cultural knowledge keepers, community members, and their cultural stories to identify local systems of relationality that ensure both individual and collective livelihoods, and in doing so, illuminate collective directions forward. So super amazing work. And then Huyamise Della Rice-Sylvester is a traditional medicine woman from Cowichan Tribes on Vancouver Island. Della's been studying the medicinal uses of plants all her life, as we saw in her intro. She's retired, makes her living giving lectures, workshops, and beautiful nature walks. And Della has vast knowledge of the Pacific Northwest plants and both their medicinal and ceremonial uses. She's familiar with plant identification, the traditional stories associated with each, cultural protocols, and how to make medicine salves. Did you want to say something? Were you?
We have a short time.
So essentially, she's amazing. She sings, dances, writes, tells stories. And that's really all I have. So we're so excited to welcome both Emma and Huyamise to be able to share with us. So I'll turn it over to you two.
Yeah, thank you so much, Kai, and hello to everyone. Thank you all so much for joining us tonight. Asiam natsiaya plum utsia tala height sapka ni alpmets atana quail yath ut hakwashta natsamach wallowin height sapka. Greetings, everyone, and prayers in my own language. I'm joining you from the ancestral and contemporary territories of the Lakshut seed-speaking peoples, including the Duwamish, Muckleshoot, Suquamish, Tulalip, Snoqualmie, and Puyallup nations. As a descendant of people from this territory, I want to welcome you. I give thanks to our relatives, the clouds, the mountains, the trees, the sky, the water, and to the plant and animal nations for holding me, sustaining me, restoring me, and continuing to welcome me. I speak from a specific place as a Cowichan person, and I want to acknowledge that place here. And I'm grateful to all of you for joining us today, and especially to those joining from Cowichan territory. I'm also exceptionally excited to be on this talk with my mom. We've done a few talks before, but this is a really special opportunity for us too, because I credit a large part of what I know due to my experiences in the world, and in particular to the choices that my mom and my dad made in raising us. And so today we want to share a little bit of that with you. We have a number of stories, and just to give you some sort of an overview, our stories are propelling us to think together about what it means to live healthful lives, to think together about who are we anyway? What does it mean for us to be human beings? To think together about how can our plant and animal relations tell us, and what can they tell us about living a good life? And finally, what do we want our stories as Indigenous people, as Huamoch Mastimoch, what do we want our stories to tell us about, to tell our future generations about how we survive this challenging time? And so I'm just going to give you a brief overview of Cowichan understanding of Indigenous systems of relationality to sort of frame our conversation, and to give you a little bit of an understanding of what that means for us as Cowichan people. So as Cowichan Huamoch Mastimoch, that is Cowichan First Nations people, we understand ourselves to be in deep relationship to our land. Our relationships extend to plant and animal nations, to natural world relations, including the land, the water, the trees, the mountains, the sky, all of these things. And our relationships also extend to our ancestors, which, as we know, encompass large vasts of space and time. So we imagine ourselves to be embedded within this system of relationship. And in a lot of ways, we are the land, we are the plants, we are the animals, we are these systems of relationships. And these relationships are also imbued with a deep sense of relational reciprocity and our responsibility to take care of our natural world and other living relations. And I draw on one of my favorite quotes by Dr. Leanne Bidesa Simpson, who says in her book, As We Have Always Done, my ancestors accumulated networks of meaningful, deep, fluid, intimate, collective, and individual relationships of trust. In times of hardship, we did not rely to any great degree on accumulated capital or individualism, but on the strengths of relationships with others. And when we think about what this means in terms of our understanding of the world and who we understand ourselves to be, for most, if not all, Indigenous people, being Indigenous means to live in relationship with the place where one is born. Cowichan, and who we are as Cowichan Huamoch, that is our sense of collective identity as Cowichan people, is deeply associated with our land. The land holds the bones of our ancestors, and so too our individual and collective identities are developed in relationship to the land across generations. And therefore, these systems of relationships and the ways that we see the world shape how we come to know what it means to be a person, and also the responsibilities that we have. And so I just want that to serve sort of as the piece that puts all of this together, because we're going to share a number of stories today, and frankly, we don't know which stories we're going to share. That's going to be based on, you know, what is coming to us in this moment, in this opportunity, and essentially what my mom is really feeling and feeling from you, and in response to you as the story listeners, in response to you as the active participants in this conversation. Even if you're off camera and on mute, there's still an element of active participation when we're sharing stories like this. So I want to turn it over to my mom, Huyamise, and thank you, Mom. I'm so honored to be here with you.
This is a journey. I mean, we're already 15 minutes, and have we done anything yet?
We did.
Hello, Cleo, Tanoia, Alitiano, Huyakala, Uyop, and all the people across the land. Like a long time ago, my nephew came, and maybe he wasn't in a good way, and he came here, and I got after him. And I got after him, and then he went away, and then his sister came back to me, and she said, geez, brother's been mad at you for over 3 months now. She said, so I made him tell me the story. And then I said, did you hear yourself? Did you hear yourself? You know, like he didn't realize I was yelling and screaming at him and trying to, you know, smack him in the back of the head for a reason, right? He's family. And if you have family and you see them going awry, then you're going to have to say something, right? Doesn't matter what, one way or the other. And so in the end, him and his wife, his new wife, started coming to see me every day, because it was hot where they lived, in a tiny and Yankee, and this was a house, and there's a land and a river here. And pretty soon they started to have babies. So then they had baby, and then baby was running around, and pretty soon it was like 3 years later, right? 3 years later. And they came this way all the time. They came this way all the time. And when they left from here, the boy that was in the tummy while they were learning and working this whole of the time, the boy that was in the tummy came out to commune with the trees, with the plants, with the medicines, with all the medicines that we were ever working with. His grandma phoned me. His other grandma went down to visit, and then she went home 3 hours away from them. And then she phoned me. And I said, what are you phoning me for? And she said, blah, 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 and blah, 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 you know. The boy threw himself on the ground and had a fit. I said, well, did you tell the parents? She said, God, no, I'm not going to tell them he had a fit on my watch. But he was having a fit because he wanted other grandma to pick some plants, and she wouldn't pick it. And she was phoning me the next day after she went home. It'd take her 3 hours to go home. And she phoned me because something happened, and she thought, oh, I need what the boy was trying to make me to pick. And she knew she needed that, right? Whatever it was, she knew she needed it. So she phoned me, and I said, well, you better phone the parents and tell them. And right now it's probably like, you know, 10, 14 years later. And you can still walk with the boy, and still, maybe the boy can still be able to pick the plants that you need for your medicine, right? Just from probably from the energy of you and the energy of the plants, because the plants started to associate. And if you guys pay attention, like, oh my God, you're walking along, and oh, you see this awesome rock, right? You see this awesome rock. It's not a rock, but we'll just pretend. We see this awesome rock, so you pick it up. So you pick it up. And rocks are like plants. They all help. Yeah, there you go. There's a rock. So each and every rock has a favorite place to go help in the body. And that's the same thing with plants. So if you go walking outside your door every day and you go, oh my God, oh, you look so pretty today. Oh, you're standing up tall. Oh, you're nice and bright and colorful. Oh my God, look, you're popping out new roses today. So if you do that every day, I mean, roses are still popping out of my place. I ate 2 raspberries off my raspberry bush today, and my son had 2. Every day we're still eating raspberries off my raspberry bush. So you be happy about whatever it is. And they know that you're happy about them. As soon as you notice a plant, the plant stands up tall and straighter. I'm being noticed. I'm being noticed. Look, they love me. They're looking at me.
Well, I just want to interject and just sort of, I guess, summarize some of the things there, Mom, that you're talking about. So the first thing was in the very first story, you were talking about how you were able to sort of help guide and shape and set boundaries for the young person. And I know a lot of time we read some Indigenous readings or knowledge or something like that, and it always sometimes sounds like, you know, it's all lovely and fluffy and the good old days and these kinds of things. But at the same time, built within the knowledge systems itself are those boundaries, those guidelines, and we know that children need those. So these are all things that can point to sort of the ways in which Indigenous knowledge systems built within them have the whole entire range of Indigenous education for our children. In the same way you're talking about, for example, the plants recognizing and understanding and seeing and feeling the energy, as well as recognizing and understanding that acknowledgement. And I think about acknowledgement from a mental health perspective. And to me, like, let's say there's a kid that's afraid of the water. And actually this happened. I was taking my kiddos swimming a couple of weeks ago, and there was some other child who was really, really afraid of the water. And the parents were trying to get the child in, and the swimming coach was trying to get the child in, and the child was kicking and screaming, and there was tears everywhere. And all I wanted to do was intercede, but really I was just somebody else's mom, and it wasn't really my business. And they were like, come on, it's not a big deal. Here, the water is lovely. It's nice and warm. Here, put your feet in. Here, it's not scary. Here, look, the swim coach is nice. And that was that adult way of interceding using logic and reason, when all that child wanted was to be seen and validated for their experience. And if instead you said something like, so there's something about the water that's not feeling right today, and you just left it at that, and you didn't try to fix it or move it or rationalize with that young person, because all they wanted was that acknowledgement that you understand that there's something happening in their body. You understand that what they're experiencing as their own emotion has something to do with them being the experts of their own emotion, without trying to say, no, what you're experiencing is wrong, and I know better than you about what you're going through right now. And we do this as adults often, and I think about that, and it's just that small little acknowledgement and something that we can learn from those plants that stand up because all you say is, I see you. That's my 2 cents about acknowledgement and validation today.
Okay, that's awesome. Just like when I was my cousin came along, and he was carrying a whole armful of he was carrying an armful of plants, and he says I said, oh, that's great. And then he says, the wife says, he says, I'm going to tell you I brought this down because the wife says it was getting in front of her nose all the time. So it kept on growing bigger and bigger. And every time she would cut it down, it would get bigger. And she finally just said, take that to your cousin. Maybe she can make something from it. Maybe you can tell her I want some, some stuff for my asthma. So he comes down and he says that. And I say, okay. I'm on Zoom. And I say, okay, and make her medicine from the plants that he brought to me, because that's what it was. And the plant was just trying to, get in her way, get in her face, because That's what she needed.
It also reminds me of another story that I was told by my cousin, and he was out in the forest and he was doing some surveying, and he was deep, 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 deep in the forest, and he hadn't been there in a really long time. And he was there with one other person, and whatever they were doing, surveying or whatever, he kept like looking through this scope at whatever he was trying to do. And out of the corner of his eyes, he saw this little, and he would look over and it would stop, and it was a bush. And he was like, huh, that's interesting. And then he did it again, and sure enough, out of the corner of his eye, and he'd look and the bush would stop. And he was like, oh, Fabian, come take a look at this. You got to take a look at this. Just try to figure out this scope here. Just try to figure out this scope and tell me what you see. And Fabian did it. And sure enough, Fabian saw 2 times as well, the bush in the corner playing and doing the thing over here. And he would look and the bush would stop wiggling away. And they were like, oh my gosh, that's crazy. I can't believe this happened. And a few days later, they were talking to some other elders, and they were telling them, this is what happened when we were all the way out there. It must have been past, I don't know, Scotts Falls or something like that. And he goes, we were all the way out there, and this is what happened. And the elder goes, oh, that bush was playing with you. That bush was singing with you because they haven't been visited in a really long time. And, you know, we have all these stories, and you might think, well, did that really happen? You know, because our logic and our reason and all of these things come together to say, well, maybe it didn't happen. But I also know, you know, there's this quote, maybe it's Thomas King, or maybe I just made it up, but nonetheless, it's a quote about the truth. And it's like, I don't know if this happened, or I don't know if this is true, but I do know that this happened. And, you know, just being able to be open to these types of opportunities and energy. And, you know, at some point in time, somebody's going to probably, you know, scholar from Harvard or something who's not Indigenous will all of a sudden come up with research about energy and ions and so on and so forth that say, oh, look, the plants can communicate or something like that. And all the while we've been understanding and knowing this for a very, very long time.
Yeah, just like when my son come running down the hill, and he came running down the hill, and he said he came down through the bush, and he was halfway down, just entered in the field, and he heard something, and he stopped and he listened, and he heard them saying, you know, but he likes the purple ones better. No way, he always likes the pink ones first. So the purple and the pink flowers were discussing him. And he heard that. He heard it. And he said, are you guys talking about me? Are you talking about me? He said, okay, I'll tell you guys what happened. He says, it's been 3 years since I came down. And 3 years ago, I got a wife. Then, I couldn't bring her through the bush. And then we got a baby, so we still couldn't come running through the bush with the baby. And then before the baby could walk, another baby was on the way. So he said, but now that baby is getting ready to walk. So probably within 2 weeks of that time, he did bring the kids down through the trail and remade the trail so they can come through the trail and notice everything that they always notice. Just like when you guys go see somebody all the time, and then you leave town and you come back and you don't go see them again, right? It's visiting and visiting, doing your normal walk. In your normal, like when I went to school, I was on campus going across. And so you can go to a tree, and a tree will brush you off all the negative stuff off of you. So I would be walking across campus and walk along the hedges and ask the hedges to brush me off while I walked along, right? I would do that, or duly take notice of plants around because they noticed all of us. And if you noticed them, then somehow or other, I always figure no matter what, like my niece came to visit, and we lived up in the bush. My niece came to visit, and she says, are those guys around all the time? And I said, which guys? She said, they're almost shorter than the counter. And I said, yeah, I said, I always figure little people have been around here forever and ever before all of us. So if you see something that's kind of like, they're just there, that's all, right? They're just a part of the land. And there's us who lives here. And throughout all of this COVID time, the bears are coming out. There's bear scratches on my compost bucket because they couldn't open it, right? My kayak is broken because the bear went running across it. Somebody was saying something. I said, yeah, well, we're not all outside anymore. So they figure they're all getting the land back, right? The bears and the deer and the moose, they're all just saying, oh, well, what the hell, what are you guys doing here? You're not normally here. You haven't been here for a while. So we're just coming out any old time, anywhere, right?
So maybe that's what we need to do.
Yeah.
I was thinking about, as you were telling the story of the trees brushing you off and cleaning off the energy and cleaning off cleaning off your spirit in essence. And remembering that a number of years ago, I was working in Dr. Megan Bang's STEAM camp, and somebody told somebody, and I can't remember who or what or how, and I think it was a part of the program itself, was this teaching or this lesson or this protocol about if you need time or space or energy or love or whatever, that you can go to the tree and have the tree brush you off. And there was this one young person who, unbeknownst to me, or perhaps all of us, because we didn't read his file, and we're supposed to read the file and all that stuff, but we didn't get around to it, and we didn't read the file. But after about a week, he'd been in the STEAM camp, and we had we had all of these different teachings and whatnot designed into the protocol of the whole entire day. And the mom came to us, and she was in tears because one night she went out to, he said he needed space, and he went outside to be with the tree, and she was like, what are you doing? And he's like, I just need space. I just need to be held by the tree. And that whole entire week, she informed us after the fact that he apparently had ADHD and had a lot of medication that he was on. But during that week, while he was able to be outside and have his, kind of be honored for the attributes and whatnot that he was able to bring to the table. And of course, none of us knew his quote diagnosis, so we weren't treating him any differently or anything like that. But nonetheless, that whole entire week, he didn't have to have any of his ADHD medication. And I talked to his mom about a week or so ago. We had a Zoom meeting, and she recalled that same story. And of course, I knew it because we all read about it in the interview transcripts, because this was for a research study, but I didn't tell her that I knew it, but I got to hear it from her this time. And even 10 years later, this young man is now a student here on campus, but even 10 years later, or however, 8 years later, or however long it is since that 2014 is when he was in this camp, she's still recalling that story with tears in her eyes. And here he is, a student at the UW. Courtesy of the cedar tree.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. Sometimes I think once in my whole life, when I went out there, I had the listening thing, stethoscope, but the tree really does sound like that. It really does sound like that. And the medicine of the tree, the sap of the tree, like Grandma says, take some of that, take some of that, take some of that sap, take some of that pitch, a little bit of that pitch every day, and that it'll go in onto the cancer and hang on to it and stay there and make it stay there and make it smaller, gradually get smaller, right? So if you have a little bit of pitch, and I use like spruce balls, when spruce breaks, it makes pitch balls on the end of it. If a cherry tree comes down, like we had cherry tree come down, and one of the boys took out, this is the pitch from the cherry tree. It actually tastes really, really good. But we had the doctor operated on the cancer patient, and then he stayed there and he waited to see who would come in to see her after. And he says, I operated on her, and on the cancer was a glass surface, on that glass surface. He says, what's that glass surface? So that's what Grandma said in the long ago day, that you take that pitch, it will hang on and make it smaller. It's huge vitamin C and it'll grab on and not let it get bigger, right? So if you do that every day, then that cancer will slowly get smaller and smaller and it'll be erased away. And that's from the pitch of the tree, right? And I say, even like when the medicine man brought me a couple of balls like this of copal from Venezuela, then I used that as well. So that's a buyable thing. If you don't go out there and get your own pitch. Just like when I remember I brought a boy, he says, Auntie, can you come with me to the doctor? So I went with him to the doctor because I was making medicine for the boy, and I was making him daily quality of life, getting around, being able to get around medicine, right? And when I told that to the doctor, and I says, when I give him that medicine, then it erases your medicine so that you don't know that he took your medicine. And he just like yelled at me and said, there's nothing that would do that, right? But I had another nephew who drank a couple of quarts of this liquid and went to the lab at 7 a.m., drank a couple of quarts overnight from 10 p.m. overnight, and went in the morning to the lab, and the lab guy says, drugs in the system? No. But there's also no good stuff. So the medicine can erase the good stuff and the bad stuff, which means right away you have to drink something to reboot the body, like seaweed and kale or lemon and maple syrup. Like some of the foods are like some of the foods together, like we get seaweed here, right? Like there's 200 kinds of seaweed out in the Pacific here. But where we buying the seaweed from, we're buying from Japan, because there's probably 400 kinds over on that side. But seaweed contains, like probably about 70-80% of what the body needs daily. And then the backer up for that is the organ grease, like seaweed and the grease from a little tiny fish. But that seaweed and kale, seaweed, organ grease, seaweed and sage, they all end up to be a whole food feeding for the body.
Yeah, so I was thinking of, often in my line of work, this is a different story. Often in my line of work, folks want to know, okay, but, with mental health, my loved one is struggling with mental health. And I remember I can't remember what year it was, but it was the time when our community was experiencing a high rate of suicidal behavior. And I was in my second year of my PhD program, and I saw all this stuff happening on Facebook, like hold your loved ones close and hold your children close. And I messaged my brother Troy and said, what's going on? What's going on? And he told me. And then I just started crying. I was at a conference and I just started crying because I didn't know what I could do. And I felt responsible for figuring out, how can I come home and help the community? What can I do? And it was so scary. And I remember telling my mom, like, I'm so scared. I don't have any money. I don't have any grants. I'm not a social worker. I don't have any degrees. Like, how in the heck can I come home and help? And she looked at me, and I don't know if she remembers this story, but she looked at me and she said, we sit and we eat together. The way that First Nations elders sharply say that when they know that you already know the answer. And I was able to remember, like, oh, you know what? We do this in all of our families. We sit and we eat together. We have celebrations. We come together at times of loss. We come together at times of happiness and celebration, at life stage transitions and all of these other kinds of things. And I remembered that. And I remembered, and thought more deeply about what happens when we sit and we eat together, and we're being present with each other. We're asking about each other's day. We're telling each other that we care about each other, or that we love each other, or that you're important, or that you belong. And then we're also remembering that vast network of relationships that I was pointing out earlier, that, you know, we give thanks to the plant and animal nations that offered their life so that we can sustain ourselves. We give thanks to the cooks who brought food to our table each and every day as it was needed. We give thanks to, you know, and all of these different kinds of cultural practices too tell us something about gratitude. They tell us something about belonging. They tell us something about being present for others. And, you know, we have to, when we cook our food, whatever is in our heart and in our, you know, our intention goes into the cooking of the food. So there's all these different teachings that are embedded within our knowledge systems that, that tell us something about that one specific moment of being present, that one moment of feeling sad, right? And I just wanted to bring that up because so often we think that it's more, that it has to be more difficult than it is, or that we get paralyzed, that maybe we can't do anything. And when my mom said we sit and we eat together, in that very instant, she was reminding me of those systems of relationships that we have between each other, those systems of relationships that we have between our plants, animals, and natural world relations and our ancestors and so on. And ultimately reminding us and me that trauma heals in the presence of caring others. And I'm wondering, you know, if that story makes you think of anything, and if you're if we're asking like, how do we, or how can we engage all of our different relationships towards mental health? Because of course, you know, physical health is an easy one, right? Like we know, eat good food and nutrient dense and all of those things, indigenous food that didn't have to travel 3,000 miles to get here, and so on and so forth. But in what ways do you think about emotional or mental health for people?
So we take a breath in. We take a breath in the nose. And then we bring it out our mouth. So when we take the breath in, we break it in from the universe, as if you're taking from all the trees and thanking them and breathing the whole of it in. Then when you breathe it out your mouth, you push it all the way down, 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 down your legs, down to the center of the earth, right? And that kind of like gives you an expansive groundedness. And like when you guys are sitting wherever you're sitting right now. And I said, uncross your feet when you're listening. You got feet crossed, then Grandma says it goes in one ear and out the other. So your feet are kind of like flat on the floor. And if they're not, then you're not going to remember all these things, and you're going to sure in the hell trying to look at the recording again.
That's what I meant when I said First Nations elders will sternly tell you what they think you already know. So it looks like Louise Foster just uncrossed her relaxed feet. So yeah, and I think, you know, like I remember I used to always run cross country with my brother Troy, and we would run together, and every, I can't remember, probably every fourth step we'd be like, and we would do a little breathing exercise where we're exerting our breathing at the same time, but it was mostly based on the rhythm of our feet. And I remember doing that, like every single time our feet connected with the ground, that I would be imagining pulling up the energy from the earth, and I would be imagining the strength of Mother Earth and the strength of my groundedness on the ground to do that. And in those moments when I was doing that, and when Troy and I were doing that together, we didn't get tired. We didn't run out of, you know, energy or space, and we did all the very long distance cross country running. So just remembering that. And of course, you know, I have to bring up the what scholars and academics would say about that these days. You know, there's an entire body of social and emotional regulation and emotionally, physically experiencing emotion and therapy that goes with these processes, which actually has something to do with regulating our sympathetic nervous system as we're responding to certain things. So even in the moments where we're experiencing high levels of crises, like right now, we can do those kinds of exercises that ground us by putting our feet on the ground, or by being present with our own body and doing these breathing exercises to imagine ourselves as a part of a vast system of relationships that are bringing us this energy, bringing us this strength.
Okay, one more exercise, right? Are you ready? I know you're all sitting down. So we're going to the back of the top of the spine, all right? And we're going to pull the top of the spine straight up. And at the same time, take your shoulders and kind of push them straight out. This is all energetically. And at the same time, that's why I made your feet flat on the floor. At the same time, your feet are pushing flat. Your instep is pushing flat to the floor. And then let it go. Then try it again. In the breathe in. In the breathe in, then you start at your neck. Then your shoulders are out. And then when you breathe all the way in, then the instep is all the way down. Don't get dizzy. Don't be doing it overdoing it now and getting dizzy there.
There's a book I just recently read called My Grandmother's Hands, and it's about somatic experiencing and recognizing that all of us in some way, and of course in very different ways, are processing in our body this trauma. And it's exercises like that, like being present, exercises like you just showed with us. And I just think that there are ways that we can sort of mitigate even this very stressful time that we're going through doing things like that.
And like my friend said one time, when it's really, really hard, she says, you pray. And goddamn, if you can't think about how to pray, she said, just say, pray, pray, like God help me. She just said, say, pray, pray. And then pretty soon you're praying because your whole being is wishing for whatever it is, or praying for whatever it is. Just like when we lose somebody and they ask somebody to sit overnight, those overnight sitters, what they're doing is begging for their forgiveness for the person, begging that they be forgiven for their whatever they may have mishapped in their lifetime, praying for them continuously. Like, okay.
So in our culture, we have grieving practices that are really, really like largely, I mean, not largely, they are 100%
Go in the room.
Collective or community-oriented grieving practices. And I remember sharing, we experienced some loss in our family a number of years ago, and I remember sharing all the different practices with my husband's, who is white, and his mother, and they were just blown away by the level of community participation, whether it was folks coming to offer, folks coming to sit with, folks coming to pray for, folks coming to help the loved one cross over into the ancestral world, folks coming to whatever. And it was not just a couple of folks, it was hundreds and hundreds of members of the community to come together. And I think about these grieving practices, and I think that they too also have something to say about all of us getting through these collective and difficult times. We're in this moment in time where we're not just experiencing a global pandemic, we're also experiencing massive racial stress and white supremacy around the world, and we're also experiencing a climate crisis. And whether we, attend to those or think about those kinds of things every day, there is a level of stress and trauma that in 100 years from now, our ancestors, our future generations will say, how did you survive that time? And I think about, how do we learn from all of our relations? And I remember, and maybe all of y'all remember too, that in 2018, there was a mother named Tahlequah, an Orca mother who carried her baby that had passed away, her baby that had died. For 17 days, she carried her in the water in the Puget Sound here in Washington state. And her baby died a few hours after birth. And people remember reporting seeing seeing, right after her baby died, seeing a handful of female orcas circling around Tahlequah and her baby. And Tahlequah carried her baby for so long in what journalists and other scientists understand as this display of grief. And then if Tahlequah needed to go down to get food, another orca would come and hold her baby for her while she went down to get food. And I want to think about that and think about not only her own grieving practices, you know, what was she trying to teach us about communal grieving? What was she trying to teach us about unapologetically grieving for her loved one, or about community coming together to support someone during their greatest time of loss? Or what was she trying to teach us about the state of her people? And were we listening? You know, because at that point in time, over the last course of X amount of years, there were no orca babies that survived in that water. So, you know, we have to think about that. And it's not just a like, oh my gosh, what an amazing or sad story, but also really just deeply thinking about what we can learn from her about survival, and what we can learn from her about strength, and what we can learn from her about transcendence. And again, I think that she was teaching us again that trauma heals in the presence of caring others. You know, so I have all these different collection of stories about these kinds of things that I've observed over the years, ever since I started observing on purpose, I guess. But I have these stories, and they come down to one thing, and it's about those relationships, that we can get through these difficult times by learning from and with our systems of relationships. And that can be other human relations, that can be our family, that can be our chosen family, that can be our plant and animal relations, as the young person taught us about the cedar, or that can be, or that Tahlequah taught us, right? So we think about these things, and we remember that we're not alone, and that, you know, even though it's difficult, we still need to reach out to that network of relationships so that we can continue to learn and think about that.
I had 2 or 3 stories in the middle of all of that.
Yeah, let's hear them.
And then I thought, oh, okay, so that was that one, and that was that one, and that was that one.
Well, you can't leave us hanging.
I know, but I can't even remember what those stories were. Hello, go to yo, ilo yo, he kailo he no he yo, bulok ita hano yo, hey yo, kalo hey yo, hey kwa. Hey. I was at an elders lunch, and they said, Donna, can you pray, do the opening prayer? And I went, can I pray? Yeah, all right. Then later on, after it was all said and done and everybody had gone, there was one elder sitting there, the eldest of the elders sitting there. And I said to him, I said, I kind of ahead of time there, because praying is, can you pray? You know, praying is different things to different people, right? You have the Catholic Church people, so you start with the Our Father and the Hail Mary. Then you have like all different kinds of praying, and what do you do when you pray, right? So I told him, I said, I just open my mouth and start praying, kind of like that, right? So when I did the Yenu Hey song, that in the long ago day, I started family gatherings, and I thought, oh, okay. So I started singing, Yenu Hey, Yenu Ha, to call everybody to eat, right? And so I sang the whole of that song to him. And then he says, now speak it. And I thought, oh God, speak it. Okay, so I spoke it. And he said, there's 3 languages in there, Cowichan, Saanich, and Didadat, the West Coast. So my mother's mother and her sister, the 2 elder ladies that I ran around with every day for 3 years, I did kindergarten, grade 1 and grade 2 with them. But they were from the West Coast of this, so they had the West Coast language. An uncle, all in the same family with the same father. They had the same father, but there was 5 ladies with kids from the same father. right? So like I was aware of everybody, but not really, because we were just there and we just, you know, and when I worked with everybody, I guess I worked without really paying attention. But when I opened my mouth, when I got big, I guess I must have been paying attention, because I don't know what I say. But he says I have perfect enunciation on the language. So one day I'll go and learn those languages.
And I think that's just a testament to all of the sort of language loss or knowledge loss or other kinds of lost narratives that often go around, especially when, you know, just especially with language. I hear it often with the language loss narrative. Like if we don't save the language now, it's going to be lost forever. And, you know, of course, I'm not saying let's just not work on the language, but I'm also saying there are so many different kinds of ways of knowing. And, you know, often we only think about the cognitive way, like we have to document this and make flashcards and do this thing and teach vocabulary and all of those kinds of things. But there's other ways of knowing, and you're just demonstrating that. And I'm wondering if in addition to that story that you just shared, can you share the story about the song on the pyramid in Belize? Do you know what story I'm talking about? The family song, Umberto's song or whatever?
I can't, you have to.
I'll get it started. So take over whenever you're ready. But this was a number of years ago when you went to Belize, and you were, 10
years ago at least.
10 years ago, and every single morning you would go up to the top of the pyramids to pray and to sing your songs. And they were often these songs that you were singing just now. And one morning you went up there and it wasn't your songs. Still no?
So many times it's not my song. So many times I have to sing. So many times when I'm there like that, and I don't want to be doing that because it wasn't my turn or it wasn't my thing. Somebody else was in the lead, but a song would push itself forward to come out, right? And I would sing the whole thing, and it would be the medicine man's teacher's song or something like that.
Yeah, and it did this day. And later on, as maybe you were holding it in, but then later on in the circle with all of the other healers, the song came out. And you just started singing that song. And one of the other healers, who is from South America, got angry. Like, who gave her that? Where did she get that song? Where did she get it? Does she have a tape? Who gave you that? And it turns out that that very song was a family song of his, and he's a South American medicine person, and it was a family song of his that had been buried with his grandmother a number of years previous.
When that happened, then it was the next morning, and I said, I sang that song, and it was a song I didn't know. It was a song that I sang because I had to sing, which means it wanted to come out, and it was around somebody in the area, right? It was telling me about somebody, it was reminding him something, you know, that we all didn't know, but he should know. Just like when I get stuff, sometimes I go like that, and one of you guys would say, you know, what, Mom, you know, like, because it might be an ancestor yelling at me or screaming at me, and I go, oh geez, like I told you once and you should know it already. Don't you remember what it was? You know, sort of idea.
So these are my mom's aunties and grandmothers yelling at her about her training. And my mom's auntie Ellen, who rest in peace, passed away at a very, very elderly age. Was it 93, Mom?
It was past 94 at least.
Past 94, so maybe it was even 95. But anyway, I remember visiting her, and she was 93 years old, and she goes, and she leans over and she whispers and she says, my roommate doesn't even close the door when she goes to the bathroom. She didn't even get her training properly. And she was completely disgusted, even though she was 93 and her roommate was about the same age. And here she was still concerned about her roommate's training. So yes, these grandmothers and aunties will continue to keep you in line no matter how old they are, but also or whether they continue to be in this realm of existence.
Yeah, exactly.
So it looks like there's some questions, and I'm going to turn it over to my Auntie Dawn Hardison Stevens, who maybe she can start off by sharing her story about how she and I met, even though she's been a part of our family and circle also. And then there's a couple of questions here in the chat.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Emma and Della. I remember when Emma was born, my grandfather, John Thomas Elliott, he was married to Beulah, my grandmother, and they traveled many times to Vancouver Island, to be with the Cowichan people. My grandfather Elliott's family, was from there. Grandpa Elliott shared many stories, from boarding schools and, running away and, lots of stories. And I remember when Emma was born, and Emma was born early. And I know that there was a huge family gathering, to help the family. And I remember Grandma and Grandpa, they traveled all over the States buying things. And I remember a pink fuzzy blanket. I remember thinking, I hope the baby, gets this blanket. And I know Emma was named after Grandpa Elliott's mother. And so when, years gone by, and I started working at the University of Washington, and I've been working with Megan Bang and with the Native Education Certificate Program. And many of the Megan's students would work together and work on writing and have writing sessions. And I joined one of those sessions, on invitation from Megan. And I walked in and there was a new student, a student I didn't see before. And she looked up at me and she said, "Hi, Dawn." And I looked at her as I don't know you. And I sat down and we sat and we listened, or we worked in silence, and we worked together. And after a couple hours and, a debriefing, it was time for everyone to get up and leave. And I was unable to move. And I'm watching everyone get up to leave. And I'm thinking to myself, oh my gosh, get up. Come on, Dawn, get up. I closed my laptop and I got up. I couldn't get up. And I looked up and I said, oh, there must be something why I can't move. I'm supposed to be here. And two students were sitting there, including the one that said hello. The two were sitting there and they were talking. And I was like, okay, I'm a third wheel. They're probably thinking I'm listening in on their conversations. And I'm sitting there asking the ancestors, why am I here? And then the student who said hello said something about her family. And I heard myself say, who's your family? What community do you come from? And she turned around and she said, I'm Emma Elliott and I'm Cowichan. And I said, and I heard my voice say, my grandfather's John Thomas Elliott. And Emma's eyes get big and she immediately calls her mom, Della, and on the phone and said, I'm here with Dawn Hardison Stevens and her grandfather's John Thomas Elliott. And I hear Della, yeah, she was married to Beulah, or he was married to Beulah. And, it's the stories of how we come together. Our paths cross for a reason. And we spent hours after that talking and catching up about, family and the significance of family, and, knowing that, with the loss of my grandmother and grandfather, the connections between the Canadian and Cowichan family, was disconnected from the United States, the lower 48, the Washington State family. And anyway, we've been together, chat almost daily, and here we are. And I'm just honored to be, here, and Della's come down many times to share talks on plant medicines, and I invited her to the Stelica Museum, and Della commented, she said, well, I need plants. And I thought, okay. And so I travel, I on my property here, I gathered all these plants, and then I took all these plants to the Stelica Museum, and Della went through each one, with the audience of the medicines and the plants and the uses, and the stories are just phenomenal. And it's knowing that, with all of us, we have our stories. Our stories are what make us who we are. And it's learning to listen to our stories, and know that stories are with us, and so are our ancestors. We are our ancestors' future. We are here because of our ancestors, and they guide us in many ways. And, it brings me back to Emma and Della.
Yeah, thanks, Auntie. I just wanted to point out, I can't really flesh it out right this second, because it's 7 o'clock at night, and this is usually when I go to bed. Just kidding. But there's something really important about the nature of knowledge that we're talking about, right? And this has to do with if knowledge is developed, if stories, if identities, if understandings, and of course, we can get all fancy and say onto epistemologies and axiologies, the commitments that we have to the understandings that we have about ourselves and the world. If all those things are based on relationship, which is dynamic and which is changing, which is contextual, which is at any very given moment based on the plethora of lived experiences and experiences that one has across time, including ancestral time, right? Then what does that mean about the nature of knowledge? I mean, it's a kind of a rhetorical question, I guess, because we can probably write a whole entire dissertation on that. But that there's just something very important if it's, because it's relational, because it's dynamic, and all of those things. It changes at any given moment, and we use, we share these stories for that purpose, right? And I remember a long time ago, I was having a hard time, and I called my mom and I told her the story about, hey, I'm having a hard time. And all I wanted in that exact moment was for my mom to say some sort of June Cleaver, Leave It to Beaver response of like, there, sweetheart, there. And she instead told me some story about my Uncle Paul and harvesting shellfish, and he was 5 years old and something like that. And I'm like, my mom doesn't even get it. This is crazy. And now a number of years later, probably 20 years later or something like that, I can reflect on that kind of story and say that whatever she was telling me, there was some kind of a story that was grounded in our own knowledge, that is grounded in our own ethical commitments to each other, and grounded in my mom's understanding or commitment to me that she didn't have the answers for me. She didn't know and couldn't possibly know all the experiences that I had in the world, and that it was my job to take something from that story to shape my own understanding about how to be in this world or something like that. And and that's again back to that conversation about the nature of knowledge, but the ways that stories come together to do that. And in particular, our Indigenous stories that don't assume that they know, that don't assume that there's a specific outcome, that leaves space for diversity or human potentiality, right? Like that there's this entire existence of knowledge that we don't know, and that even though we're here, at a prestigious university and these kinds of things, we really don't know anything at all. It's the bottom line there.
It's kind of along the lines with this question. that Shelley has asked. It says, do you have any stories about these floods we are currently experiencing here on the West Coast? No, I have my thoughts, but I'll have you guys share your thoughts first.
Did you catch that question, Mom?
Well, because, well, there was a flood, right? And then, like, there's Mount Zuhalem or Mount Prevost, and there is stories, but I'm not the storyteller. There is storytellers with those stories.
Mhm.
I'm not really the storyteller, but I can't really remember the story. But I do know that there is stories, but I can't have the story to know it.
Which also attends to the responsibility that we have as story listeners and as storytellers to understand and acknowledge that part of that relational responsibility, that sometimes we have responsibility to share what we know, and sometimes we don't have that right to share those stories. And we might not have that right because it might not be our story, or we might not have that right because it's not the right season or the right context or the right moment. And recognizing that even too, the knowledge system is guided by that sense of relational responsibility, I think is really also important. And that was just a demonstration of that. Also, if there's something that I never know, I'm just going to say I don't have the right to share that story. I'm just kidding.
And
So I take these pieces of pitch like that, and that isn't very much, right? And if I take that and crush it down, that's the about the amount that I put in to make a pot of tea, and that would make probably 2 to 6 cups. Go in with 2 to 6 cups or something like that. Like, you don't need very much. You don't need very much. You just, like, I take this part and I would use about this much of the pitch in like a quarter of a teaspoon or less than an eighth of a teaspoon or something like that. And even like whether you put it in your mouth, you put it in hot water and make tea, take a little bit like that every day. And that's the pitch part. Like sometimes when we're having a hard time and somebody's being all grouchy and growly every time, then take the rose, like the rose bush, and boil the rose parts of the rose bush and wash the doorways and the windowways with the rose bush to make amenity feelings, to clear it off. Sometimes I use this gachmin or sage or something like that to be washing around. And when we burn that at night or make the smell of it, you don't have to burn it to have the smell of it in the room. Like I just take the gachmin and seed and break it in half and you have the smell of it in the room. And at nighttime when you do this, then Grandma says the bad spirits, they don't like that smell, so they just carry on. In the long ago day, everybody had wood stoves, so you take some of those seeds and you'd say, put some gachmin on the fire, the kids can't sleep. Put some gachmin on the fire, there's been a death in the community. So you put it on the burning wood stove so the smoke of it will go through like we did earlier with it. That was the gachmin. And then like you can do that at nighttime. You can do that in the hospitals when somebody's in the hospitals because they'll tend to want to be bothered while they're in the hospitals as well, right? Okay, I don't want to start another whole 9 yards here.
You know, the stories, you know, we talk about stories and, you know, regarding the story of the floods and regarding the stories of the lands that's being shared here. You know, another elder, another relative spoke of listening to the lands, you know, because the lands are our teachers. And, you know, the land is speaking to us about, what some of the needs are. And, it is looking to listen. And so you think of the floods, you think of everything that is happening. It's listening to what Earth is trying to tell us. There's another one. Can you explain more about the pitch of the cherry tree helping your body with cancer and other things? And how does a person do this? This is from.
Yeah, did I say that already?
So you did. So is it, I know you were talking about the pitch from the cherry tree. Can you,
Yeah, but
is
it can be any pitch. Yeah.
Mhm. And then what about in relation to COVID?
I've been putting it in every tea that's gone out so far, and no matter what's going on. And since I've been doing it, and even the people who have died from COVID that were using my medicine, whatever they had ahead of the COVID time, the quality of life on that has been massively improved continuously on everything, everybody who uses the medicine from the land.
Yeah, thank you.
Paula, she goes, I get almost traumatic messages off and on. I start praying to the creator, but down tobacco and light my sage. I have to go around the house and open all my window while a sound comes from my mouth. And then I phone my elder. I tell her I am getting messages tonight that either my mother or I am not going to be in a good way. Often I have to grab blankets and lay on the ground, no matter the weather. I always fall asleep. That night was end of November, and breathing in the frosty air through my nose woke me up. When I got in the house, I put my kettle on and noticed my phone had a missed message. My mother was rushed to the hospital and suffered a very serious stroke. This is one of the many stories I never tell anyone, especially as the message is of a certain person. What are your thoughts about what happens?
I mean, it's just a part of the gifting, right? It's just a part of the gift.
Mm-hmm.
For you have to be in a gifting family, so that's a part of your gift. And if you recognize that happens, because all kinds of things happen with me, for me to know things coming and going, especially if somebody is right in front of me, right? And you go with it and you give thanks for it. You give thanks for the help of it, that it came to you. So whatever it is, maybe it's making you do what you need to do ahead of what's going to be happening.
And then just to bring it also back to the different kinds of ways that you can cleanse, or, and it sounds like Paula is making, already doing things for cleansing, offering tobacco and lighting sage and lighting a candle and burning gachmin that my mom was talking about earlier, the wild Indian celery. Or, you can burn cedar in your home too, like in a pot, burn cedar branches, and that will cleanse out your house from smoke, but also from like a spiritual type cleansing as well. So I think just continuing also to lean on and call on the different kinds of plant and spiritual medicines that your community has.
Okay, it's just about it now. No, the pictures from pine, fir, like usually spruce. And if you have to buy it, there's copal, right? That's different kinds of pitch.
And maybe one last question, Mom, do you have any stories about nettle?
Well, you just got to know that the stinging nettle plant is great, and it's probably like the seaweed of the earth with its qualities. It's got a lot of a lot of qualities that the body needs daily. You can eat, like, I like the buds. In the springtime, you take a whole pile of buds and you can make a whole spaghetti pot with cream of mushroom soup in it or something like that. You can eat the plant. You can take it, and the base of it is thick enough so that you can use it for breeding. When they get tall, you can eat the seeds. They're nice and sweet. Grandma will say, "Go get me some of that stinging nettle. I want to feel my legs. Hit my legs with it." And when she says, "I want to feel it," that means there's no feeling in her legs. 10 to 1, there's been a stroke or something that happened. So if you hit it with the stinging nettle, then that calls the nerves to that area. And then you go to another plant that's for nerve damage redevelopment. But you can use you can eat the nettle, you can make things with the nettle fiber, right? You can eat. And I only put it in medicine if somebody knows that I'm going to put it in medicine. It's good for pain and stuff, but when you make it into a salve, it has, some plants have the living quality, stays with it. So you have to know that, otherwise it's like freaky. It's like somebody was there with you massaging your shoulder, kind of like that. So I don't use it in a big way unless I duly note it that I've used it.
I'm also remembering a time when my mom broke her wrist. Actually, yeah, was it your wrist or your thumb? But anyhow, and how that got healed pretty quickly. And I think it had a lot to do with the plants and medicines that you were probably putting your hands in every single day.
Yeah. That was your brother who told me that. He says, "Hey, Mom, there's a stinging nettle plant just right down here. You can walk to it, you know?" And I went, "Oh, God." So when I broke my wrist, there's 3 bones sticking out right here, and I didn't know why it was such a trip, but there's 18 staples in here. So when I went to the stinging nettle plant and put my hand in it every day, 9 days, I put my hand in it, 9 days before I could feel one little dot on the 9th day. And then the 14th day, I felt it down here, right? I felt it here. And usually when you have a nettle plant, there's another plant right beside it. So if anybody ever gets stung somewhere, you go to where you got stung from, whether it's a nettle or poison ivy or whatever, there's a yellow dock or a burdock or something or a plantain grown right there to be used as an antidote for the stinging nettle if you can't do the pain. I mean that biggest story is God, like, 10, 20 teenagers lining up to get their elbows swacked with stinging nettle.
That was at the STEAM camp. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah.
Oh, these were kids, elementary age and teenage age kids, all lining up because Fern Renville and Roger had shared the story of nettle saves the people. And they were like, "Yeah, look at me." And Fern was up there like swatting herself with it. And all the kids were like, "I want to do it too." And of course they did. And then as soon as it happened, then all the kids were racing toward the plantain and chewing it up and putting it on their stinging just to, I guess, test out the antidote super quick. Because of course, where there's stinging nettle, there's usually plantain as well. Or something else that would work. That was
Okay, guys.
All right, Mom.
I've got to run off to bingo. I'm sorry.
Yep. I want to thank Emma and Della for joining us tonight. It's knowing that this event wouldn't happen without our sponsors. Thank you to the Intellectual House Academic Programming Committee, the Center for American Indian and Indigenous Studies, the University of Washington's Department of American Indian Studies, the Squaxin Island Tribe, the Suquamish Tribe, the UW Department of English, and the Banks Center for Educational Justice. Know that there will be a recording on the American Indian Studies website and also on our Facebook page in about a week. And if you enjoyed this event, consider supporting it and more events like it by donating as a friend of AIS at ais.washington.edu /support us, student scholarships, public programs like Sacred Breath, and more. And we're going to have an announcement later. Our next event is going to be in May 2022, possibly in person on campus back at Le Chabot, the Intellectual House on the UW Seattle campus. And I just want to thank everybody and thank everyone for joining us. And
yeah, thanks, Auntie, for having us, and also to Kai for all of the organization, and Ray. And I'm also seeing so many familiar names on the screen, Sue and Hui U, and Newalk is calling in and joining in from Cowichan, and Joey's on the line. So is Chadwick and Roger and Chris and Michael, and you know, it's just, and Susan and Seema. It's just so beautiful to see so many familiar names and folks who come out to support us. So we send you off with all of the blessings that we have in the world, and we wish you health and ease as you move through the rest of your evening.
Hoitka, 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 CM. Hoitka, 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 CM. Hoitka means thank you in Halkamilam. CM means somebody greater than yourself. I'm just saying, hoitka, hoitka for the whole night.
I think we said thank you.